Got questions. We've got answers. Welcome to Ask the Experts on 570 News. Advice and tips from the people who really know. Now here's your host, Dave Callander.
And thanks so much for joining us for another edition of Ask the Experts. I am pleased to welcome back to the program Howad Michalos Associates with 20 offices across the province and headquartered right here in Kitchener. And today, Howard Hayes and Ian Martin will be representing the Howad Michalos team. They've both been on the show before. Good to be back. And Ian works here at the Kitchener office for Howad Michalos. It's literally just up the road. And Howard works in the Cambridge office, where my dentist used to be, I think.
That's right.
Actually, yeah. And with more and more people looking for help with debt, the show this week is going to focus on answering some of the most commonly asked questions that Howard and Ian come across every day. Topics like options for dealing with debt, dealing with collection agents, bankruptcy, consumer proposals, credit reporting, also debts owed to Canada Revenue Agency. They want their money too. And, of course, making a plan to deal with your debts. So we'll also have the phone lines open. So if you've got a question, you can call us at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. And I should mention, of course, that if you want to see how beautiful we are webcasting today's episode at 570news.com, and you'll be able to watch that after the fact, again, if you just can't get enough of us. So thank you so much for coming back on the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Always good to see you, Dave.
Yep. Good to see you back. And as we said, we're going to be addressing the most common questions that everyone asks, so we might as well get right to it. I'd say, well, what can I do? What are my options to deal with my debt?
Right, and I guess it's important to understand the kind of circumstance that people are in when they reach out to us, right? They're feeling overwhelmed, they feel like they have too much debt, and maybe they've spoken with friends or family members, maybe they've been online and they have some information, but they really don't know how to get started or what might be the right choice for them. So then when they contact us, our role effectively is to assess their circumstances and provide them with information about the different, what we call informal as well as formal choices, and that way that person can make an informed choice about how best to move forward. So when I say formal, that would be the options available under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act, and that would be either personal bankruptcy or what's called a consumer proposal. And then informal is effectively everything else, right? That would be referring to perhaps somebody talking to the bank about doing a consolidation loan. By the time somebody's talking to us, most times that's not a realistic choice. But if it is, from what we've talked about, we are quite happy to redirect them in that direction. There's another arrangement administered by credit counselors referred to as a debt management plan. In Kitchener-Waterloo, there's a Mosaic Family and Counseling Services that helps to do this. The concept with that one is to, the counselor steps in, negotiates with the creditors, and you're committing to repaying 100% of the principal, but in most situations there's a pretty big break on the interest rate. It's just trying to work it out to pay back the full amount over time. And then sometimes, if there's the right circumstances, people are able to negotiate directly with their creditors. Perhaps if there's only one or two creditors for fairly small amounts, maybe they can negotiate some kind of settlement directly with those creditors.
Now, everyone's different. Everyone has a different tolerance for how much debt they've accumulated. Some people will get upset about it really quick, and some people won't. So how do you know if you've accumulated too much debt?
You make a good point there. I think a lot of people are very comfortable with dealing with a threshold of debt. They carry certain balances on their credit card that they're quite used to carrying each month. And we often have a saying that it's not necessarily the size of the debt that you've got, it's your ability to be able to pay it that's the key issue. When you're trying to work out, okay, do I have too much debt? Like, how much is too much debt? Is 10,000 too much? 20,000, 30,000, 40,000? When does it get to the point where it's too much? One of the things we often would say is that if you think you have too much debt, then that's probably a good sign that yes, you have too much debt. Because if you're relying on credit to pay bills, if you're afraid to open your mail at the end of the day when you get the bills come in because you're scared of what they're going to say, if you're going over your borrowing limits, if you're bouncing off your maximum limits on your credit lines, if your paycheck's being garnished, if you've got creditors calling you, threatening and making demands against you that you're not able to meet, if you're having things like utility services threatened to be cut off because you're not being able to make your payments, these are all classic signs that you're probably carrying too much debt and you might need help to deal with it. One of the classics, obviously, is if it's keeping you up at night. If you just can't sleep because you're worried about your debt, or if you're constantly fighting with your spouse, your partner, or if you're even afraid to talk to your partner about your debts, these would all be good signs that you may be carrying too much debt.
And I guess I would add to that as well in terms of saying that, all these different things that Howard is talking about, it causes a fair amount of anxiety and stress, but people are often, they're afraid, right? They're afraid, or they're embarrassed, or they're ashamed to talk to somebody about what to do because they feel very defeated by the situation. And then our role, as I said, is just to kind of step in as an observer and hopefully shed some light on some of the alternatives that are available to them.
I guess the real question is, how did we get here? What causes money problems? I mean, how do people get in trouble with that? Right.
And I guess there's any number of ways that it could happen, and for many people it's actually a combination of many different factors. But I think for most people there's certain types of what I call big life changes that have the effect of causing either a significant reduction of income or an increase in terms of their expenses. And the classic examples of that would be something like, you lost your job, or perhaps, reduced hours, like a job share, perhaps some kind of injury or illness that prevents you from working or causes significant extra expenses. And then also, quite honestly, I think one of the very leading causes is people going through separation and divorce with their partners, and that takes on many different forms, even that itself, right? There's often people throwing away a bunch of money on legal costs. You have family support orders that are to be maintained, and then also simply you go from having two incomes in a household to one income, and it just makes it that much more difficult to manage normal household expenses plus a debt load.
Now, you mentioned Howard that. One of the signs, if you got people calling you, you've got collection agents calling. And I've heard, certainly from you folks and from other people, horror stories about that. They'll say anything on the phone. And if they're calling and they're threatening legal action, they say they're going to come and take your assets. Can they actually do that?
It's possible. I would generally categorize debts into three different areas. You have secured creditors, which are your mortgage, your car loan. You have services that you pay for, which are things like utilities, hydro, electric. And then you have unsecured creditors, which would be your credit lines, credit cards, overdrafts. For the first two, they're the ones that you probably want to worry about the most if you're afraid of losing an asset, because a secured creditor, the concept of a secured contract is that if you don't make the payments, they have the right to come and repossess the asset that was pledged as security. So if you really want to keep the asset, it's important that you're keeping up to date with the payments on those. Likewise with services, obviously, if you don't pay your gas bill at the end of the month, if you don't pay your hydro bill, there's a good chance that eventually they would come around and cut those services off so that you can't use them. With unsecured creditors, with credit cards, credit lines, it's a little bit more difficult. They would have to go to court first to be able to get the permission to be able to seize wages or put a lien against your house and property. They can't just click their fingers and make it happen overnight. They can threaten to do so, and it's often the threat that scares people into trying to meet their demands or seeking help with their debts. It is possible, but it's a longer process for a credit card company to be able to attach themselves to assets.
Now, one of the other things you mentioned was having your wages garnished. That doesn't mean having parsley put around your money.
No, it's not to relish on the side.
So, what is a wage garnishee?
Well, I guess that would be kind of the end result if a creditor does actually take legal action, right? So they sue you in small claims or superior court. They get it's effectively a court order. It's a court order that allows the person that you owe money to seize a portion of your paycheck. So that order gets forwarded to your payroll department, and they take a portion. In Ontario, the standard amount is 20% of your net paycheck. So, we can talk about options for you to deal with your debt. This is effectively an option for the people that you owe money to try to collect this debt from you.
And how can you stop it if you've got a wage garnishment going on? How do you stop it?
Okay, so let's assume that it's already happened, right? It's played out and it's either started or is about to start. You have limited choices, right? You theoretically could try to negotiate with them so that they will voluntarily remove it. But the analogy I make there is kind of the old, bird in the hand versus two in the bush, right? If I have a court order that says I can have 20% of your paycheck, am I going to voluntarily remove that based on your promises to repay this, right? Because to this point, you haven't been very good in terms of paying it. So it's theoretically possible, but it's pretty unlikely. So if that doesn't work out, your options to legally stop it would be to file effectively a proposal under the Bankruptcy Act or a bankruptcy. And that gives you legal protection. It's called a stay of proceeding. It's legal protection under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act. So those are the two options that a trustee in bankruptcy administers for you.
They're the only two options that will give you the necessary legal protection to stop it, proposal or bankruptcy.
All right, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about those options a little later in the show. If you've got questions and you'd like to ask your question on the air, I invite you to call us. Our lines are open at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. My guests today, Howard Hayes and Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos, trustees in bankruptcy. You can call them as well. If you'd like to get the process started now, 310-PLAN is the number to call. That will put you through to the nearest office. And if you'd like to get some more information ahead of time, go online to hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. More of Ask the Experts is coming up here on 570 News.
Ask the Experts with your host, Dave Callander.
And thanks so much for joining us on the show today from Hoyes Michalos, trustees in bankruptcy. I'm joined by Howard Hayes and Ian Martin. 310-PLAN is the number to call if you'd like to get a hold of the Hoyes folks today. Also, hoyes.com is the website, HOYES.com. Let's go over to the phones now and take our first call of the show. Say hi to Jane. Hi, Jane. You're on 570 News.
Hi. I'm a little bit nervous. I found out last week that I'm being garnished on my pay, and I'm not really sure. It would be from an old credit card, but I thought I hadn't heard from them for over a year, so I thought it had probably gone away. And now, unfortunately, I work for a small company, and everybody kind of knows everybody, and I've got this garnishment against me, and I'm not sure what I can do about that.
Okay, I'll take this one. Hi, Jane. My name is Ian. I just have a couple quick questions for you. Do you know the amount of the garnishee?
I last time I got a statement from them, it was probably around $2,000.
Okay. Well, I guess it's important to understand that if you're not sure about what the amount is, you can talk to the payroll person, and they have to have a copy of the court order so that you can confirm the amount. Do you have other debts as well?
I do. I have some credit cards. I've got a furniture loan with City Financial and a little bit of a tax debt from when I withdrew the RSP last year. Okay.
Well, let me explain why I was asking that. Because we were talking before about how perhaps filing a bankruptcy is a legal way of stopping a wage garnishee. But, for example, if that was your only debt and it was only $2,000, there might not be a really compelling reason to do that. It means that it would continue until that debt was paid, but that was your only debt, then you might consider, the pros and cons about whether it made sense to do that. So, given that you do have some other debts, I think it probably makes sense for us to talk a little bit more about your circumstances. I don't know if it's practical to do that right now, but I would suggest that you consider calling our office on Monday so we could set up a consultation or have a bit more detailed conversation about moving forward.
Okay, and that's free?
Oh yes, for sure. The idea is that we'll always sit down with pretty much anybody to at least talk about your circumstances, shed some light on your different options for you. Okay, there's no cost or commitment to sit down and talk to us.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well that eases my mind a lot.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, take care, Jane.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Jane, thank you so much for your call. And again, it's a common question, and people don't know that they can sit down for free and just talk to someone and get all of the options. And as you said, maybe bankruptcy isn't the best solution for her if that would have been her only debt, but it sounds like maybe there's more to the story.
Oh, exactly, and I guess it's hard for, something like that, a wage garnishee is very, very scary, and it's natural that people will reach out and say, okay, what do I do now? But again, big picture, if that was Jane's only debt, then it could potentially be that the cost of bankruptcy would exceed the amount of that debt. But like you said, it sounds like there's some other issues going on as well.
Well, we want to thank Jane for her call, and we would love to hear from you as well. If you've got something going on in your life that is, it's keeping you up at night, people are calling, you've got too much debt, call us at 519-570-2545. Out of town, 1-800-570-5715 or star 570 on your cell phone. Now, of course, a firm of bankruptcy trustees obviously receives a lot of questions about bankruptcy, and today on the show we are reviewing these common questions. So let's continue that. It is a big, scary word, but what actually is bankruptcy?
I was actually asked the very same question in my office yesterday. A client said, what does it actually mean to go bankrupt? So the answer essentially is that filing a bankruptcy is a legal process. It's available to Canadians that have, I think technically you have to have more than $1,000 worth of debt, which I think most people may do nowadays. The concept of a bankruptcy is that what you're doing is you're assigning control of the assets that you've got to a trustee in exchange for elimination of your debt. That's the fundamental premise. Now, within the rules, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose all of your assets if you file bankruptcy. There are rules designed to enable you to keep sufficient assets and income to be able to maintain a reasonable standard of living whilst you go through the bankruptcy process. Once you file an assignment in bankruptcy, it is legally binding, so creditors have to stop any collection activity that they're trying to take against you to recover their debts. And on completion of the duties and the payments that you have to make during a bankruptcy, you'll then receive your discharge, which means you're no longer responsible for those debts. So it essentially is a method of providing you protection and relief and a fresh start from your creditors. And just to take it one step further as well, I think the original word bankruptcy, if anyone out there is interested, I think we learned this in our studying days, that it comes from the Latin word bancus ruptus, which I believe, Ian might correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think in the old Roman days, if a tradesman couldn't pay his debts, the old Roman guards used to come round to the marketplace and essentially smash his table so that he couldn't trade anymore, and they would seize the property on that table and distribute it amongst his creditors. So it was a sign to everyone that the Roman was in trouble. But so yeah, that's just a bit of history there for you as to where the word comes from.
Did he get it right, Ian?
I gave him all the tick marks down the way. They're excellent answers.
Yeah, it's a little bit less drastic nowadays, though. Yes. No one's coming round to smash up your property, that's for sure.
Thank goodness. Now, we talked about the wage garnishments, and Jane called about that. Does bankruptcy actually stop the garnishments? Yeah,
it does. The only kind of garnishment that won't be stopped is if you're being garnished for support payments. If you owe money, if family responsibility is garnishing your wages for child support, spousal support, that would survive the bankruptcy. You can't stop the garnishment from that. The one good thing about the bankruptcy and indeed the proposal process is that when you file, the protection goes into effect immediately. So you don't have to wait for creditors to approve you filing a bankruptcy. There is no qualification to go bankruptcy in that sense. As soon as you file the paperwork with the trustee, it gets filed electronically with the Government of Canada, and the what's called the stay of proceedings goes into effect immediately, which means we can contact your employer if necessary the same day to send them the instruction necessary to stop the creditor wage garnishments that you're having.
Now, as you were describing what bankruptcy is, you mentioned that we're working towards the point where we are discharged. What does that actually mean?
I think Howard used that word earlier. So ultimately in filing a bankruptcy, so far we've very much focused on the starting process where you get protection, but discharge is at the end. Generally the word discharge means to release, right? So when your bankruptcy is completed, you receive your order of discharge. It's when you receive the order of discharge that you are released from your legal obligation to pay the debt. So that's why we call it a fresh start from the debts.
So the stay of proceedings that stops the garnishments stops the creditors from taking any action against you whilst you're going through the process of the bankruptcy. But the legal responsibility that you have towards those debts is discharged at the end of the bankruptcy. You in a sense have to complete your end of the deal of the bankruptcy in order to get that discharge.
Another common question, does it cost me anything? Does going bankruptcy involve a fee, or what do I have to pay?
Yeah, there's generally two things that make up the cost of a bankruptcy for the most part. One would be assets. What most people are worried about in a bankruptcy is whether or not they would get to keep or have to surrender assets in a bankruptcy. As I mentioned before, there are specific rules in place that allow people to keep assets during a bankruptcy. For argument's sake, a vehicle. If you have a vehicle that's bought and paid for that has no finance against it in Ontario, if it's worth less than roughly $5,500, you would keep that vehicle. You wouldn't lose it in a bankruptcy. Even if it was worth more than $5,500, you could still keep it as long as you paid the trustee the difference between what the vehicle's worth and the $5,500 limit. So it's not automatic that you're going to lose the assets, but it will be factored into the potential cost of the bankruptcy. The second aspect is your income. There's a rule in a bankruptcy called surplus income. It's essentially the more you make, the more you have to pay. Government tried to devise a system to create fairness within the bankruptcy process. I'll just use an example. A single guy who wants to file a bankruptcy is essentially allowed to take home about $2,000 a month in a bankruptcy. When I say allowed to take home, what that means is if you average less than $2,000 a month, the bankruptcy is probably going to be very quick, very cheap for you. Generally, there would be a couple of $100 a month that you'd have to pay for 9 months if it's a first-time bankruptcy, and there wouldn't be anything extra on top of that you'd be having to pay. But if your income did average more than $2,000 a month, there's a couple of extra payments that have to kick in. The reason why the government has that rule is what they're trying to devise is a system that essentially says a single person that makes $3,000 a month would pay more in a bankruptcy than a single person that makes $2,000 a month. The person that makes more has to probably pay a little bit more.
Right, and I think what that's trying to accomplish is effectively a balancing of the rights. I mean, the person who owes the debt has the right to a fresh start under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act, but at the same time, the creditors have the right to be treated, fairly and equally. So as Howard was saying, somebody who basically makes more pays more into bankruptcy, which means the trustee has more funds available to return to those creditors a higher portion of what was owed to them in the first place.
My guest today on Ask the Experts, we're talking with Howard Hayes and Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy, online at hoyes.com, HOYES.com, and you can call them at 310-PLAN. We have to take a break. News is coming up at 12:30, and then we'll be back with more right here on 570 News.
You've got questions. We've got answers. Welcome to Ask the Experts on 570 News. Advice and tips from the people who really know. Now here's your host, Dave Callander.
And on the show today with me, Howard Hayes and Ian Martin of Hoyes Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy. We want to mention again that if you'd like to see us, we're actually webcasting the show today on 570news.com. 310-PLAN is the number to call if you'd like to get more information or start the ball rolling. And if you'd like more information online, HOYES.com. Going to head over to the phones now and take another call, this time from Sherry. Hi, Sherry. You're on 570 News.
Hi.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
What's your question today?
I was in a car accident a few years ago, and I haven't been able to go back to work. I'm on a disability, but I find it's not enough to pay my bills, so I've been using my credit cards, and I'm getting further and further behind. I don't know what to do.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, well, let me talk a little bit about your situation, Sherry. I mean, do you see a possibility of returning to work at some point in the future?
No.
Okay, so I guess it sounds like you are what we refer to as being creditor-proof. So I'm not sure if you were listening earlier, but earlier in the show we were talking about filing a bankruptcy or filing a proposal under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act to protect yourself from a potential wage garnishee. So I guess my point is you do not have wages. So your creditors could go through this legal process to have the right to garnish your paycheck, but if you're not returning to work, there really is nothing that they can take from you. So that couple things to keep in mind. That it doesn't mean that they can't take legal action. It just means that they do take legal action, they won't be able to actually take anything from you. Furthermore, it doesn't mean that you can't file a bankruptcy. So you could file a bankruptcy. It gives you protection where they can't call and harass you. But I guess in your situation, it wouldn't be so much for financial protection. It would just be more if you felt like you needed the peace of mind to make sure that any kind of calls or contacts stopped. So I guess I say think about that a little bit. Do you have, and if it's something that you think you might want to go ahead with, just give our office a call on Monday, and we can talk about scheduling a consultation. Our number again, just locally, it's 747-0660, also 310-PLAN.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your help.
Okay, thank you, Sherry.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your call, Sherry. And if you've got questions for Howard and Ian, the lines are open. 519-570-2545. It's toll-free out of town at 1-800-570-5715. Or if you're out and about, call us on your cell phone, hands-free, at star 570. Now, being on the show before, you've spoken a lot in previous shows about consumer proposals as an alternative to bankruptcy. So let's switch our focus over and do some questions you get about consumer proposals. And, of course, the most common one would be, what the heck are they?
Right. And it's a fairly new word in terms of insolvency vocabulary. So what it effectively is a legal agreement with your creditors where they allow you to repay less than the full amount of what you owe to them. So for some people, they hear that and say, well, why in the world would my creditors agree to that kind of deal? And the simple answer is that if you're offering to repay a greater portion of the debt than what they would receive through the bankruptcy process, most times they're going to be on board with it, right? So if bankruptcy would mean little or nothing back to them, if you offer something better than that, most times they will agree to it. Sometimes people, they hear a little bit about a consumer proposal and they call us with the apparent, I'll say, misunderstanding that it's kind of like an easy way to just simply knock down the amount of their credit card debt. That's not the case, right? It is, if you want to think of a bankruptcy as a total last resort, a consumer proposal is a second to last resort. It is for people who cannot pay their debts in full, meaning that they don't have enough income, they don't have assets that they could sell or refinance to pay their debts in full. It's just a different way of getting protection from your creditors and a fresh start from the debts without all of the same negative consequences as bankruptcy. So really, two different options, same end result, just two different ways of accomplishing it.
We're finding more and more people are filing proposals nowadays because a lot of people would rather feel better about themselves offering to pay some of their debt back through a proposal as opposed to just walking away in a bankruptcy.
And just one more thought on that. I mean, the word bankruptcy has been around for a long, long time, right? As Howard was commenting, it goes back to the Roman times. The word consumer proposal is in Canadian law for approximately 20 years. The reality is either one of them are an indication that something bad has happened to you, but people still have much more of a negative association with the word bankruptcy. So people feel better about a proposal where they're actively repaying a greater portion of the debts.
And I think that psychologically that would be common because, I didn't mean to go into debt. And in a lot of cases, it's a life event has happened. Yep. You feel bad about it. You do want to repay as much as you can.
And we hear that a lot. A lot of people, when they come into the office, that's one of the first things they say is that, I wasn't expecting to lose my job. I didn't want to be in this situation. I want to pay as much back as I can. How do I do that? A proposal is a good way of being able to do that.
Who's eligible to file a proposal?
You can file a proposal if you've got if you live in Canada and you have debts in Canada. The only real limit restriction with a proposal is that if you're, again, being a single person, if your debts are greater than $250,000, and this would be your debts excluding the mortgage on your principal residence. So all of your car loans, credit cards, credit lines, if all of those debts are less than $250,000, you can file a proposal. It can be filed jointly as well. So if you're husband and wife and the debts are held joint between you, you can file the proposal jointly. Both of you can file at the same time. Actually, technically, even a bankrupt can file a proposal. So if you've actually started a bankruptcy and you're at an early stage in the bankruptcy and your circumstances dramatically improve, and you have the ability to be able to negotiate a proposal with your creditors, that's something the creditors might actually be willing to accept, and that would actually serve to annul the bankruptcy if the creditors accepted that proposal. That's not necessarily the right answer for every bankrupt, but in certain circumstances it could work.
Now, there are all different kinds of debts. What kind of debts are included in a proposal?
It's effectively the same as bankruptcy, and that means that it will deal with your unsecured debts. I mean, we went through that a little bit before, right? Your unsecured debts are things like the credit cards, lines of credit, overdrafts, payday loans, income taxes, old cell phones, old utilities, stuff like that. It's I kind of said this a moment ago. In a way, it's effectively two different ways under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act to deal with the same group of debts.
Okay, now assets. I'm sure people ask you about this all the time. Like, what am I going to lose? What assets do you get to keep? And what assets might you have to give up in a consumer proposal? This
is one of the great advantages of a proposal over a bankruptcy, is that in a proposal, you essentially get to keep control of all of your assets. Whereas in a bankruptcy, you're assigning control over to the trustee. That doesn't happen in a proposal, so you get to keep control. That would be subject to the rights of your secured creditors. So obviously, if you have a car loan, if you want to keep the car, you would have to continue making the payments on the car loan. The proposal would be filed on all the other debts that you have. You don't have to worry about losing RSPs, tax refunds, losing your house, losing a car. In a proposal, you get to keep control of all of those.
And I'll add one thing to that as well, right? a big concern for people. We talked about cars, but a big concern also is with their houses. So it would be very common that we talk to people about their different options and just make up some numbers here. Say there's $50,000 in credit cards. We go through the situation. Maybe there's a small amount, something like $5,000 or $10,000 of equity in their home. In a bankruptcy, we have the obligation to the creditors to recover that $5,000 or $10,000 for them, the creditors that is, even if it's not nearly enough to pay the debts back in full. For somebody like that, if there's a regular paycheck, a proposal would be a very good choice because we have no authority or any duty to step in and do anything with their house. The key, though, is that has an impact on the quote-unquote fair amount to offer through the proposal. So if there was $10,000 of equity in the house that the creditors would get through bankruptcy, that means to be fair to the creditors, you offer more than that $10,000 through the payments that you're going to make in the proposal.
It does sound like a good option for a lot of people. How do you actually go about filing a proposal?
Well, a proposal is administered by a trustee in bankruptcy. We are specifically licensed by the federal government to be able to administer bankruptcies and proposals under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act. There are other services out there that offer, I'll say, programs or plans or options, whatever you want to call it. You need to ask who they are and what they're doing. If they're not a trustee in bankruptcy, they are not administering a consumer proposal. It could be some kind of other settlement arrangement, but I mean that's a topic for a different day. We could talk for a whole hour about that. Ultimately, if it's a consumer proposal that is the right answer, you meet with the trustee. We provide you with information about your options. If you want to move forward with that, we get all the paperwork together. That's a summary of your assets, your budget. Ultimately, we prepare the paperwork. When it's filed with the government, that's when the stay of proceedings is in effect. That's the protection that we talked about. And then we also have a duty to notify all the creditors. And then that starts the ball rolling on a process where the creditors respond back to our office to signal whether they're in favor of the amount that you've offered through the proposal. So
how does the proposal actually get accepted?
So like Ian said, I think the start of submitting the proposal to the creditors, they're going to indicate to the trustee within 45 days. They've only got a maximum 45 days to request the trustee review the proposal. By that, what they're essentially asking for is for us to count the votes. If no creditors send that request within 45 days, the proposal's automatically accepted. So they have to actually request that we physically look and count the votes. If we are requested to do that, that extends for a further 3 weeks. At the end of those 3 weeks, we count up all the votes. Every creditor is going to get one vote for every dollar that you owe them. So the big people that you owe money to, they're going to have the biggest influence in terms of saying yes or no. Like Ian said before, what they're essentially doing during that period is analysing whether or not the proposal's giving them a better benefit than a bankruptcy. We don't submit proposals unless that's the case, so in most cases it's a no-brainer that they're going to say yes because they would rather get something from the proposal than nothing in a potential bankruptcy. What we need in a proposal is a 51% majority of the votes to be in favour of it. So we don't necessarily need everyone to agree to it. We just need the majority to agree. If the majority say yes, then it's binding on everyone. I often say, think of it like an election. You have like a red team and a blue team, and if more people vote red, then red wins. And anyone that didn't vote also has to accept the fact that red wins as well. So it's kind of the same principle how it works.
What happens if the majority of the creditors don't like your proposal very much?
What would typically happen is the first thing we would do is say, okay, well, what would it take to be a yes? Often what would happen is creditors would say they want a little bit more. It's unusual that they would ask for a lot more because they don't want to scare you into a bankruptcy. Because let's take an example. If you offer a proposal where you're settling your debts for, let's say, $300 a month, and the creditors come back and say, well, we want $350 a month. Well, for the extra $50 a month, you might think, okay, that's fair, that's reasonable, we can afford it, I'm happy to agree to that. If they came back and said, well, we don't like $300 a month, we want $1,000 a month. Well, it might be easier at that point for you to decide, okay, well, if it's going to cost me less in a bankruptcy, then there's no way I can afford $1,000 a month, so I might just be better off doing the bankruptcy instead. And the creditors know that too, so they're not likely to ask for anything that silly as a counter offer because as much as you don't want to go bankrupt, they don't want you to either.
Yeah, I think it's really this whole process. It's a real balancing act where everybody's losing. Everybody's losing in this process. I mean, the people that owe the money don't want to go through this. They want to be able to pay their debts. Mm-hmm. The creditors are losing because they're not getting the full amount of their money back. We're just looking for what I'll say like an optimal result. We're trying to minimize the losses, and the creditors don't want to push so hard to push you into bankruptcy where they're going to lose even more than what they're contemplating through the proposal.
Wage garnishments, collection calls, they stop with the bankruptcy. Do they also stop if you file a consumer proposal?
Yeah, it's exactly the same protection. People talk about bankruptcy protection. It's the exact same protection under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act for a consumer proposal.
My guests today on Ask the Experts, Howard Hayes and Ian Martin of Hoy's Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy. A great place to go if you'd like more information right now is hoys.com, HOYES.com. And you can also call 310-PLAN, which will get you to your nearest Hoy's Michalos office. Heading into our final segment of the show, if you still have questions you'd like to ask on the air, now's the time to call. 519-570-2545. Out of town at 1-800-570-5715. Or you can call us at star 570 hands-free on your cell phone. More of Ask the Experts just minutes away here on 570 News.
570 News returns to Ask the Experts. Here's Dave Callander.
Thank you so much for joining us. Howard Hayes and Ian Martin are my guests today. On behalf of Hoy's Michalos Trustees in Bankruptcy, online at hoys.com, HOYES.com, and you can call them at 310-PLAN. We're going through some of the most common questions that Howard and Ian get in the office on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure that people are concerned about filing a proposal of bankruptcy. They'll say to you, well, it'll hurt my credit rating. At that point, it's kind of already hurt. But before we get into that, can you explain what a credit report is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's effectively a collection of information that different people are reporting about you. It's, for the most part, it's people you owe money to, but there's also some government stuff that can be there as well. So the information is things like, address, employment, with specific debts that you have, the limit on it, the current balance owing on it, your history of payments. And the idea is that the information can either be positive or it can be negative, and it's kind of like it gets all thrown into a pot and stirred up, and from that it's a tool that either your current or a potential future creditor is going to look at in terms of assessing risk. And the risk is the risk of you not being able to pay back either your current debts or one that you might be applying for.
Mm-hmm. So why is a credit report important?
Well, I guess it's just an extension that it affects your ability to obtain credit in the future, right? And we kind of said this as we were coming into this section here, that the reality is that a proposal or a bankruptcy will show up on your credit report, and that is a piece of negative information. But a good test of your credit ability, your credit score, your credit report is talking to somebody right now, right? If you're maxed out now and you can't make your payments, very likely, adding a bankruptcy or a proposal to it might actually be positive information because it cleans up the past and allows you to rebuild for the future.
There's a growing number of people out there also that are coming to the realization that your credit rating is important if you're planning on getting into more debt. Bit of a
well, yeah, when you think about it, really,
if you already have a mortgage, car loans, and you're not really planning on borrowing any more money, your credit rating just simply isn't really all that important. But we've all kind of been brainwashed to think that you must have an absolutely perfect credit rating.
And most of us don't know what's on our credit report. So how do we get a hold of a copy of it?
The easiest ways, there's two main credit bureaus in Canada, Equifax and TransUnion. Best ways would probably be online nowadays if you go to their websites. I believe Equifax is equifax.ca and TransUnion is tuc.ca.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You can either get a copy by paying for a copy. I think it costs like $15 or $20, something like that, and that will come with all the bells and whistles and give you your score and an analysis of why you may have a good credit rating or a bad credit rating. Or you can apply for free by downloading one of their application forms, filling out the information, sending it off in the mail, and then they'll return that to you within about a week, and that's just a basic copy of your report. There are two people that can control the information that goes on your credit report, the people that you owe money to and you. So once you've got a copy of your credit report, and I would encourage everyone to get a copy of it to have a look and see what's on there, because if you don't know what's on your credit report, you're relying on the information that other people have put there. So you have the right to challenge it. If you think that information on there is incorrect, you have the right to challenge that with the credit bureau and request it to be investigated. But if you don't do that, if the first time you're finding out there's a problem with your credit rating is on the day you're applying for a mortgage and the mortgage company's denying you, you've probably left it too late to try and fix the problem. Whereas if you'd looked at it a few months in advance of making such an application, you might have been able to address the minor problem that may have been able to be fixed.
I'm just looking at how much time we have left, and I know you really wanted to touch on the Canada Revenue Agency, so we are going to jump ahead and talk a little bit about our friendly folks in Ottawa.
Sure.
We haven't talked about income taxes, and I suspect a lot of people have questions about how to deal with tax debts as well. Let's say someone comes and says, I'm behind with my taxes. Is there anything I can do? Can I make a deal with CRA about my taxes?
Well, when you say make a deal, I assume you mean can I, if I'm the person who owes the money to the government, can I negotiate it with them on my own? And the answer is that it's not impossible, but realistically, it's very, very difficult. Just like any large creditor, they have a whole, I'll say, legion of people who act as collectors. They don't call them collectors, but that's really what they are. So yes, you can negotiate with them, but the challenge is, again, another balancing act, right? Balancing your normal living expenses, balancing your current tax obligations, but then also coming up with some kind of payment plan to get caught up on what you owed from past years, and then also being able to do that on terms that they find acceptable. The interest rates that are set under the Income Tax Act for tax arrears, it's very, I'll say, burdensome. So it's, as I said, it's not impossible, but on your own, people find it very difficult to be able to offer some kind of payment plan to the CRA that they find attractive.
First and foremost, they're going to want to see that all the tax returns are actually filed. If you're coming to us and you haven't filed your taxes for the last 5 years because you're afraid of what you may owe them, job number one is going to be get the taxes filed, because Revenue Canada won't negotiate on a debt that they don't know. If you haven't filed, they don't know what it is that you owe them, so they can't make a deal on a debt that, in theory, doesn't exist until the return is filed. So they would insist on making sure that's done first before they'd even talk about a deal.
All right, and furthermore, I mean, our conversation here has been focused on an individual negotiating with the CRA. If you find that you're not able to do that, there is a very common misconception out there that tax debts cannot be part of a bankruptcy or it can't be part of a proposal. That's a fallacy, right? It is an unsecured debt like other unsecured debts. It gets treated the same in a bankruptcy or a proposal, just like a credit card or line of credit.
I've actually heard of occasions where the CRA will freeze someone's bank account. Is that true? Can they actually do that? And what else can they do?
So I guess, first of all, yes, it is true. We spent a lot of time earlier talking about wage garnishments and say like a credit card company having to go through a court process to be able to do that. The CRA isn't bound by the same obligations. They don't need to go through court. So yes, if you owe them money, they can freeze your bank account. They can get a wage garnishment as well. If you're self-employed, say contractor or subcontractor, if they know who your customers are, they can send effectively, it's not called a garnishment, but they can send basically a notice to those people to effectively intercept the money that they were going to pay you for the work that you did them. That's not a good answer, right? No. And furthermore, the most extreme thing would be that if you have a house, they actually have the right through the land registry office to register a lien against your property without your consent. So that would be the worst case scenario. I said a moment ago that a bankruptcy or a proposal deals with your taxes because they're unsecured debts. If you waited too long and they've registered against your house, it is now a secured debt, and that would not be part of a proposal or bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Now, the whole idea behind what you do is helping people make a plan to deal with their debts. So let's talk about making that plan. First thing is a budget. You'd be surprised how many people have never actually sat down and made a budget. So how do you get started with something like that?
I think the easiest thing to do is start with a plain piece of paper and a pen. You've got to start looking at what it is that you're spending your money on. I think that's the key to a budget is a lot of people, when we ask them the question, what is it that you normally spend your money on? Sometimes we just get blank looks on their faces. They're not quite sure where the money's going. So the easiest way to track that is to start recording everything. Start looking at where it is that your money's actually going. Is there any area where you can maybe make cutbacks? I think one of the tricks to budgeting isn't necessarily cutting something out completely. I think it's just managing it to an appropriate level. So say for argument's sake, if you spend $300 a month on cigarettes, okay, I'm not going to sit here and say don't smoke and that will save you $300 a month. What I would say is, okay, would it really make much of a difference if you tried to cut it down to $200 a month? Maybe, maybe not. But that's something to start. Somewhere you can make a lot of little gains, and the little gains all add up over a period of time. There's plenty of resources available online nowadays. There's calendar budgets that you can use, software that you can use that will help with budgeting, spreadsheets. People use a lot of spreadsheets. I think one of the keys, though, is do something. Don't just bury your head in the sand and expect that everything's going to work out at the end of the month. Be proactive and start to see where you can make a difference.
Yeah, and it's hard when people can't answer the kinds of questions that we ask them about the budget. It's because they haven't spent time in the past, and it's not everybody, but it's a lot of people.
Or maybe they're just afraid to.
Right, or at some point they felt so overwhelmed that they kind of gave up. But it's through this information that you effectively prioritize, right? And that way you can make some better decisions going forward.
Mm-hmm. In closing, is there anything else you'd like people to know if they're having some sort of financial difficulties?
I think the key is to talk to someone. Like Ian said before, with the people that called into the show, I think if you're in doubt, if you think you're struggling, call, ask. We're here to help. We're available Monday to Fridays. We often have people in the office Saturday mornings as well that would be happy to call you. Happy to speak to you. I think our latest commercials that we're running on adverts at the moment is essentially saying, give us 30 minutes. We can sit down with you, we can talk to you on the phone, we can look at your situation, and in most cases, within 30 minutes, we're able to give you a concrete answer in terms of what would be a good solution for you.
Guys, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
As always, learned a lot, and if you'd like to get the ball rolling, 310-PLAN is the number to call, or check out hoyes.com, HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Join us again next weekend, Saturday at 11, for more of Ask the Experts here on 570 News.